LinkedIn presents.
Yo, and hello, welcome, what's up? It's Vinny Potestivo, and welcome to I Have a Podcast. When I first sat down to record episodes about sustainable creativity, the last thing I was prepared for was the intense emotional journey that I would be going on. I had no clue how powerful actually recording podcast episodes is. I have interviewed about 36 friends, colleagues, and creatives that I can't wait to tell you about. It's all about sustainability. It's all about having a balance. It's all about managing my tools and my skill set and connecting opportunities with actionable strategies and creating content that matches those strategies. And whether you are an influencer or a television executive, a producer, or a dentist, a doctor, or someone who just has to make content for a living, this podcast is for you because I want to help you make great decisions, not just the specific creative ones that appear in video, but really understanding how to approach making content is a powerful tool to have in your belt if you're looking to have a career in content for a very long time. And speaking of long time, a long time ago when I first got my start at MTV in the late 90s, I had the brilliant opportunity to work with SuChin Pak, who is my guest here on I Have a Podcast. We chatted about a lot of things, the highs, the lows, and the reason why podcasting is a brilliant platform for her to be able to share her strengths, and I'll let her explain those to you. But it really is all about people, and I can't believe the amazing people I've had a chance to work with, and I am so thankful for that, and I can't wait for you to meet them all. And with that being said, let's go meet SuChin Pak. If you look back at our time at MTV and you look at where you are now, would you say that this is exactly where you thought you would be?
First off, you're the reason why I was at MTV, right? You're
the reason I stayed. People like you, talent like you for sure. Are you kidding?
We had good times. You and I. It's true. Man.
One day you were on my schedule and I was like, that's the girl. That's from, I just saw Jamie Lynn Sigler on her show. And that's the girl I was talking about. That's the one. We really want to hire her. And I went downstairs. I was so excited. I was so prepared, actually. You were one of the first talent where I was like, I'm going to make this happen. I see it. I want it.
I had that. I felt that energy from the second you walked in. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know the story, about in terms of like where you were in your career. But it's that energy we both brought to it, which I think now is interesting as you share with me of like, for you, it was like, oh, I'm going to make this happen. For me, I was so nervous until you walked in and I felt like, oh, this person isn't who I'm auditioning for, but I'm auditioning with. And that completely took all that nervous energy I had. And then I could just nail the reading of a prompter, which is what I do for a living. And, you look back on any career and there's all those flags that like along the way, you're like, right, that was that marker. And then that was that person and that marker. And, some people I have no idea where they are, but I can credit to so much of my life. I mean, you and I have kept touch over the years, but I do remember that moment so very clearly. When I met you, I was full on Connie Chung time. You know what I mean? I was going to do this job. I was going to go from here to a network news. I was going to sit behind an anchor desk. I was going to eventually end up on national news. That was the job that I had in my mind.
Pictured it, like manifested it. You saw it.
Yes, manifested it. But to be fair, it was the only version of journalism that I was ever shown. When I got to MTV, I tell people about the Diary series. Up until that point, you didn't have journalists carrying their own cameras and videotaping themselves. For us, doing the news was a personal experience and a personal way of storytelling. I had never thought that me as a person, as Asian, as female, as young, any of that mattered in the storytelling until I got to MTV. And I realized that could be and should be, for me, part of the storytelling. I never thought that my experience as an Asian American female was part of the storytelling. I was always looking at the way that news journalists would be, you get a piece of paper, you do an interview, you have no point of view, You're just there to like deliver the news. And at MTV, it wasn't that. It was who I was part of the story. And to me, that felt like such a more honest and fun way of being a journalist. And so being at MTV really changed the way that I view journalism and really what I call storytelling.
Just stories that matter. You interviewed a ton of people. Are there conversations that resonate during that time, or is it all popped culture?
Vinny, I mean, I get asked this question, and every time I get asked this question, I need to actually come up with an answer. One of the things I think about, and tell me if you agree or disagree, is not necessarily in the interview, but in the way that Jay-Z was who he was. Meaning that he really controlled the narrative of his story and what was allowed in the interview space in a respectful way. And he was difficult in so many ways and very inaccessible. I always remember that his interviews came with it was like he was going to respect you and answer your questions, but you were also going to respect him. And I think that there was that I always sort of like respected and appreciated. But I don't know. I mean, I was interviewing, celebrities and music stars, and they were all young. I don't know that was a big part of my experience there. Also, Vinny, remember, like, I never grew up with MTV, remember? So being at MTV was the first time that I ever really even saw MTV. So I didn't grow up with like this notion of like celebrity cultures, even being a journalist and understanding that. I think in some ways that really helped me in my career, is that I really wasn't in it for all of that.
I just miss running down to the studio 10 to the hour. And also, you were there for one of my biggest audition moments ever in my entire life. The Weakest Link. We went to this hotel to audition.
And wait, what was it? What was the answer that you...
I dug deep into my soul and said, Lord, give me just one word that I can say out loud, because I have no...
And you said purple.
I answered the purple. And
I know what the question was. I remember now.
What was it?
The question is, what is a group of witches?
Yes.
And the answer is coven.
That's
and you
an
said,
answer. I went with purple. That was a fun moment.
Vinny,
what?
For years, every time we would see each other, we'd be like, purple?
Purple? It just kind of like came. I was just kind of feeling it. The whole room laughed, though. That was a fun moment. I'm so glad you were there with me on that little aha moment of my energy.
There is, I mean, for a lot of, like you said, just kind of growing pains of that place, there was that tight crew of people when we were there. And I always have to remind people that, like, when we left, around about the time that we left is when MTV stopped being the version of MTV. Do you know what I mean? It's not like I left and then even TRL was on.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Or that even 10 to the hour. We weren't doing that for a long time. By the time I left, the writing was on the wall that like times were changing and it's just different. It was just a moment in time that was just that time. And
it's crazy to think of a time where we didn't control our own narrative. Like, to us, social media allows such control over our own story in a way that it impacts our own reality. The same way reality TV did 20 years ago and still does today. And when I think back to early unscripted TV programming, there's one show that comes to mind that paved the way for many, many other reality shows to come. Lessons learned. Getting comfortable with pushing yourself out of your comfort zone is definitely the best way to grow as a creator. If you start feeling uncomfortable and you start feeling like you need to push yourself out of your comfort zone, well, that feels like a good indicator that you're going in the right direction. But I'll let SuChin translate that. And while at MTV, you created My Life Translated.
Mm-hmm. My Life Translate. Get it translated, because I'm Asian. I have to translate my Asianness. To MTV's credit, like, listen, we got a lot of things wrong. But we tried.
We really did.
We really did. And I think part of it was because we were the center of youth culture. And that's what growing up is, right? It's just trying and miserably failing. But like, that's youth culture. is in the effort and the growing. And so, that show kind of evolved from conversations with producers and executives. And I really wasn't at first really keen on doing a show like that, and certainly not on bringing cameras into my home.
Yeah.
That took a while for me to get comfortable with. And I don't think I ever was comfortable with it. I think we did maybe 6 episodes and then I was done. And once I left MTV, I had the experience of going to a network news place and doing the whole thing. I had that offer and I couldn't do it. And then it just took a left turn from there. And I've never been on any quote unquote right path or path I saw when I first met you. Like nothing has been the same ever since I left MTV, because I just couldn't fit what I wanted into a typical newscaster box anymore after being there. There was no going back to like sitting behind a news desk.
Yeah,
Like,
literally.
It
Never happened.
To me,
yeah, that was the last time.
That was it for me. So I've been, trying to figure out ways in all of the creative projects I do to come back to that experience, which is the experience of being able to speak as the totality of who I am.
If there's one thing I've learned from SuChin and her career, it's don't be afraid to take a risk. Especially as a creator, trust is a gut feeling that strengthens over time. And there's a risk of doing projects with people you know really well, and there's a risk of doing projects with people you don't. So I ask, what are you really risking? Add to Cart. How did it start?
Add to Cart, the podcast, started with myself and my co-host Kulap. Kulap and I knew each other because we were organizers in the activist space, in the Asian American Pacific Islander space. We had this organization called A+, which is within Time's Up. So it's the AAPI women's group within the Time's Up larger organization. We had known each other through that work, which is so different, right, than doing a podcast. And so when she approached me, while I knew like her energy and I knew a version of her, I didn't know one single thing about her outside of us planning events and like talking about Asian American women in the workplace. I mean, in our meetings, granted, we were always goofing off and laughing. Like we were the ones that were in the back. They were like, guys. So you know what I mean? I knew them. Like,
yeah, I know.
The wise asses, And so I think we both got a sense that, we knew each other in that way. And there was some hesitation. But like I said, there's always a risk when you're doing something creative, who your partners are. And you live and die by that choice. You really do. I think anyone who started a business, anyone who started a creative project that then has to bring on a partner, because every creative project eventually has to leave your brain and go out into the world, you have to assess like the risk. And there's a risk of doing projects with people that you really, really know well, and that could go badly. And then there's a risk of someone maybe you don't know as well, and that also could go badly. So I figured, you know what? It's a risk either way. This one felt more comfortable to me. I also knew that she shared a passion for something that was so intrinsically centered in my own value system. Like that's important, right? Like you can have just like hold 3 things that for you are immovable objects, And for me, it was being an Asian American female in entertainment, in the media, and then it goes on. And she aligned with all of that. So when we decided to do this podcast, funny enough and ironically enough, I said, dude, I do not want to talk about race, politics, ethnicity. I want to talk about stupid shit that we do all day, and that is mostly shopping. And so we both landed on that, and we thought, okay, that would be really fun. Add to Cart is about the things that we buy, the things that we buy into, so it could be shows and movies and books, that then reflect on who we are as people. And naturally and organically, to nobody's surprise, like all of our episodes are about Asian American identity as women. You're like, fuck, I really didn't want a podcast about this. And yet here I am. But for me, it's just the most authentic conversation about that. Like, I didn't want to be a journalist reporting on that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I've done that. That just felt too heavy. But again, it's just funny that most of our episodes are me crying about, trauma and my marriage.
You've got this new role that you play now in media that's fun for me to get to watch too, as like a mom and as a wife. Like for many of us who grew up here in the States watching you in the early 2000s, we know what you brought to, we knew exactly what your point of view is. Yeah. This is a really fun way and I'm kind of jealous everyone gets this side of you. This is like the real SuChin Pak. So do you hear yourself being your mom?
No, because, oh dear God, I hope I'm not turning into my mother. God bless
Is that
her.
the secret root of like what you were afraid of this becoming, or?
No, I have turned into, and I didn't know that this was in me, the Asian auntie. It's the auntie that we all have, that older woman at the table that's a little too drunk, that's a little too honest, you know what I mean? That'll tell you exactly how it is. So I didn't know that was the role that is so naturally to me. And you asked, like, am I my mother? For me, being a child of immigrants, I'm my mother to a degree, but my mother is so far from who I am. Like, we don't even share a language, So in that respect, it's physically, metaphysically impossible for me to be my mother. But I can be the Asian auntie that, like, my mother has friends like me, you know what I mean? That, like, I see at church and blah, blah, blah. I'm that friend of my mom's that was the Asian auntie that was always around. And it's just been really fun to, like, embrace, like you said, my age, where I am in life, my kids, the fullness of my life, which wasn't something that I shared or even wanted to share when I was at MTV very much. I've never, ever really been this personally open with my life and about my point of view about things. And so it's been really, really fun and scary, and it's exhausting. And I often don't want to record.
Yeah.
But then you do, and then, and then it's great. And then you crawl back into bed, and then you have to do it again the next. And it's the creative process, I think, and it's okay. I want to say it's okay, and you know this, and I'm sure you've talked to people about this. The creative process is often very painful, and that's okay. I think when we set up expectations of even what the process should be, it makes it more difficult than it is. I realize that, like, my hesitancy, my fear, all of that, my nervousness about this particular project is part of what feeds the project. So I'm okay with that,
But that's what we signed up for.
A natural, yeah. And by the way, it opened a lot of doors. I always said, I never said no to anything. I said yes to everything. And so, I don't say yes to anything now.
Yeah.
But that's because I put in 20 years of yeses. And now, it's just different. But without that, I wouldn't know to do that.
It's so true. The creative process can be painfully rewarding. And with the ups and downs of the industry, burnout is legit. So prioritize. It's hard to know how to prioritize projects and family and opportunities, and especially even yourself. It requires taking a step back, taking a breath, accessing the change. Like, it's 20 years later, SuChin Pak has a full-on family. How did that happen? You have the funniest husband in the entire world, too. You married a funny guy. Did you? He's a funny man, Mike Bender.
His brand. That is, like, he truly is that. What a wacky... what are my kids going to do for a living?
What a cool medley of cultural awareness, now that I'm thinking about this, with what Mike created with Awkward Family Photos. Yeah. Just the idea of knowing that we all have them. And we certainly do, and they're all awkward.
But our family is very, especially Mike, while he does Awkward Family Photos and it's a digital site and blah, 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 he writes children's books. He's for him, he's a writer first and foremost. This is, in terms of, like, recording and doing any of this, is not something that they've really been exposed to. Like, I don't know that they've ever even seen me on TV. It is going to be embarrassing when they're a bit older and we're archiving all this and I'm talking about, the type of underwear I wear. You know what I mean? It'll be embarrassing. And you know what? Such as
welcome back. Welcome back to media, SuChin Pak.
Welcome back. Tell me a story that really matters. Okay, move along.
Exactly.
It's okay. You'll get over it.
How do you protect yourself throughout the creative process? What are some things that you've learned?
I think for me, time management is really, really, that's like the baseline. So what does that look like for me? I look at my day, my week, my month, or whatever, and I build time to be creative on project X. I build time to be creative on project Y. I build time to do nothing. I build time to do an hour of just internet hole diving. So compartmentalizing my day like that allows me to be very relaxed in the time I've allowed. And then when I move on to something else, I try really hard not to have any cross time. So for me, the way that I'm the most creative is when I'm the most structured with my time, which can be a little bit counterintuitive. And so for me, from like the minute I get up to like when I have to be with my kids is filled every half hour. I block my time in every half hour. And so I know that when I look at my calendar or Post-it with my day blocked out into half hours, that I'm really taking care of myself and I'm energized and creative. When it's empty is when I get real funky.
Yeah.
And it's not productive. So to me, time management is a really big part of it.
So to have an organized, methodical approach to being creative makes a tremendous amount of sense when it comes to how to be impactful and still be innovative. Like you have to be completing to be able to be continuously creating. I love that. I love that advice. Well, I'm going to copy you on some of my things just so you know I'm working. I'm just going to do a little tag. Just a little purple tag.
Purple it up.
That was like the best experience. I love you so much. You are the best.
I love you too. Yay.
You've been listening to I Have a Podcast with Vinny Potestivo. If you like what you heard and you want to hear more, please find us at ihaveapodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next week.